Hi, welcome to the Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class, sponsored by the Hurricane Utah North Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Mike Parker, and since 2008, it's been my privilege to be the instructor for this class. The Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class meets on Thursday evenings between September and May to discuss the scriptures, teachings, and history of the restored Church of Jesus Christ. If you live in or are visiting the Hurricane St. George area, I'd love to have you join us. Time and location are available on the class website. There's a link to that in the show notes just below this video. Also on the class website, you can download my notes, which includes footnotes documenting my sources, this PowerPoint presentation, and handouts that I distribute in class. Please note that this YouTube channel and the class website are not official sites of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Hurricane Utah North Stake, or any other church unit or department. I alone am responsible for the content on these sites. What you're about to see is a recording of my notes for one of the lessons. If you enjoy this video, please click the like button and share it with a friend. And please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new content is posted to this channel. My friends, the gospel of Jesus Christ is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, and the authority and keys that he held are now vested in the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And, most importantly, Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. I hope you enjoy this lesson. In this lesson, we'll be introducing Sidney Rigdon and discussing the doctrine of Zion and the commandment given to the saints to gather to Zion. We'll also talk about the office of church historian. We'll be covering Doctrine and Covenants sections 35 to 40 and section 47. In the last lesson, we discussed the Lamanite mission, in which Oliver Cowdery, Parley P. Pratt, and other men were called in October 1830 to travel from western New York to Indian Territory west of Missouri to preach the restored gospel to American Indians. On their way to Missouri, they stopped in northeastern Ohio, where Parley Pratt shared the Book of Mormon and the restored gospel with his former pastor, Sidney Rigdon. Rigdon believed and was baptized by Oliver Cowdery in early November 1830. Since Sidney Rigdon played a significant role in church history and the Doctrine and Covenants, let's review his life up to this point. Rigdon was born on 19th February 1793 in St. Clair Township, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, about 8 miles or 13 kilometers south of Pittsburgh. He married Phoebe Brooks in 1820, and they became the parents of 11 children. Sidney was a tanner, a farmer, and a minister. He was a powerful and persuasive orator. In 1821, he became a popular Baptist preacher in Pittsburgh. In 1821, Sidney associated himself with Alexander Campbell's Reformed Baptist movement, which later took the name Disciples of Christ, also called Campbellites by outsiders. Alexander Campbell was a Christian primitivist who rejected all existing churches and their creeds. He believed that the true Church of Christ no longer existed, and restoring apostolic Christianity would usher in the millennium. In 1826, Sidney Rigdon moved to Northeast Ohio to become pastor of a Baptist church that was more accepting of Campbell's views. By 1830, however, he found himself disagreeing with Campbell on a number of key issues. It was at this point that Parley Pratt and the other Mormon missionaries arrived in Ohio, and Pratt called on Rigdon, who was his former pastor. Rigdon read the Book of Mormon, believed it to be true, and was converted to the new faith preached by the missionaries. He and his wife were baptized in early November 1830. Rigdon proceeded to take the restored gospel to members of his Ohio congregations. By the end of 1830, there were 300 Mormons in Ohio, almost 3 times as many as in New York, where the church had been founded 7 months earlier. Sidney Rigdon would become one of the most prominent figures in the early years of the restored church. He served as a counselor to Joseph Smith in the First Presidency, acted as Joseph's scribe in the new translation of the Bible, participated in several important revelations, including Section 76, the vision of the 3 degrees of glory, and organized and taught the School of the Prophets in Kirtland. After he was baptized, Sidney Rigdon felt compelled to meet Joseph Smith. He took Edward Partridge with him and traveled to Fayette, New York, arriving in early December 1830. They stayed with the prophet for 2 months. Soon after they arrived, Joseph received 2 revelations, one directed to Sidney Rigdon and one to Edward Partridge. These revelations are now canonized as sections 35 and 36 of the Doctrine and Covenants. In the revelation to Sidney, the Lord compared him to John the Baptist, in that he had prepared the way before the Lord by baptizing, but did not give the gift of the Holy Ghost. Sidney was also told of a greater work prepared for him. He was commanded to act as Joseph's scribe in receiving the Scriptures. This was a reference to Joseph's new translation of the Bible, something we'll discuss in a future lesson. Since we're discussing the first meeting between Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith, this is an appropriate time to review and debunk one of the oldest claims about how the Book of Mormon was produced. Sidney Rigdon was one of the few members of the early church who had any formal religious training. He was a skilled writer and speaker, which was unique in a church that was comprised mostly of lay people who had no professional ministerial experience. Since 1830, critics of the Book of Mormon who reject its divine origin have had to find some way to explain its complexity, congruity, and profound theological messages. Joseph Smith was, of course, too unskilled and uneducated to have written it himself. Because of Sidney Rigdon's extensive knowledge in religious subjects, some critics have claimed that he was the author of the Book of Mormon. The hypothesis goes like this. A Congregationalist minister named Solomon Spaulding lived the last years of his life in northeast Ohio and southwest Pennsylvania. Shortly before he died, he wrote a work of fiction titled Manuscript Story. In 1833, Dr. Philastus Hurlbut, doctor was his first name, he wasn't a doctor, medical or otherwise, was excommunicated from the church for immorality. Full of bitterness against the restored church, he then traveled throughout 4 states collecting sworn statements from people who were hostile to Joseph Smith. These affidavits included sworn statements from Solomon Spaulding's family and acquaintances, asserting that the narrative of the Book of Mormon was identical to the one in Solomon Spaulding's manuscript, including, purportedly, the idea that American Indians are the descendants of Israelites who sailed from Jerusalem, that the founding Israelites were named Nephi and Lehi, that the descendants of these men separated into 2 nations called Nephites and Lamanites, and that wars between the 2 groups resulted in many deaths. The affidavits also claimed that nearly every sentence of Spaulding's work began with, "and it came to pass," or "now it came to pass," just like the Book of Mormon. Hurlbut gave the affidavits he had collected to newspaper publisher Eber D. Howe, who published them in 1834 in a book titled Mormonism Unveiled. This has the dubious distinction of being the first anti-Mormon book. Hurlbut also told Howe about the Spaulding manuscript. Eber Howe proclaimed the Book of Mormon's connection to Solomon Spaulding's manuscript right on the title page of Mormonism Unveiled. Howe tracked down Spaulding's widow and examined the manuscript, but it bore virtually no resemblance to the Book of Mormon. Instead, it told a story about a group of ancient Romans who, while sailing to Britain, were blown off course and landed in North America. This didn't deter Howe. He instead claimed in his book that there was a second Spaulding manuscript that had been lost, and that manuscript was the source of the Book of Mormon. He asserted that this purported missing manuscript had fallen into the hands of Sidney Rigdon, and Rigdon gave it to Joseph Smith, who used it to produce the Book of Mormon. Howe concluded his book by asserting, quote, "We therefore must hold out Sidney Rigdon to the world as being the original author and proprietor of the whole Mormon conspiracy until further light is elicited upon the lost writings of Solomon Spaulding." Unquote. Eber Howe didn't bother to explain how Sidney Rigdon supposedly came to know Joseph Smith and passed the manuscript to him without anyone noticing. Filling in those inconvenient gaps in Howe's hypothesis was left to another man, Pomeroy Tucker. Tucker was born and raised in Palmyra, New York, and claimed to be, quote, well acquainted with Joe Smith, the first Mormon prophet, and with his father and all the Smith family, unquote. In his 1867 book, Origin, Rise, and Progress of Mormonism, he expanded on Howe's allegations of a conspiracy by claiming that there was a mysterious stranger who learned about Joseph Smith's treasure-seeking activities and began secretly visiting him in the summer of 1827. In Chapter 7 of his book, Tucker triumphantly revealed the mysterious stranger to be Sidney Rigdon, who was the literary genius behind the screen. There are two significant problems with the Spalding-Rigdon hypothesis. The first is that there's no evidence whatsoever that Sidney Rigdon knew about Joseph Smith before Parley P. Pratt and his companions came to Kirtland, Ohio in late October 1830. Nor is there any evidence that Rigdon had met Joseph Smith prior to his trip to Fayette, New York in December 1830. Not a single eyewitness corroborated Pomeroy Tucker's claim that Rigdon had traveled numerous times from his home in Mentor, Ohio, to Palmyra, New York, a distance of over 250 miles or 400 kilometers, to give portions of the Spalding manuscript to Joseph Smith. All the evidence indicates that Pratt and the other missionaries introduced Mormonism and the Book of Mormon to Sidney Rigdon in the fall of 1830, 7 months after it was published. The other problem is that a second Spalding manuscript that was the purported source of the Book of Mormon has never been demonstrated to exist. Howe invented this manuscript out of thin air when the one he obtained from Spalding's widow turned out to have a completely unrelated story about ancient Roman soldiers. Despite these two significant impediments, Eber Howe and Pomeroy Tucker's Spalding-Rigdon hypothesis was the standard non-Mormon explanation for the origins of the Book of Mormon, and it remained so for 50 years after Eber Howe published Mormonism Unveiled. In 1884, a copy of Spalding's lost manuscript was discovered. It was published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1886, and it's been republished as recently as 1996 by Brigham Young University. It bears no similarity to the Book of Mormon whatsoever. None of the Book of Mormon's proper names appear in the manuscript. There are no uses of "it came to pass," and Spalding's story about a group of seafaring Romans who were blown off course and landed in northeastern America is nothing like the Book of Mormon's account of Israelites from Jerusalem who were led by God to a promised land. Although the discovery of the manuscript all but demolished the Spalding-Rigdon hypothesis of the origin of the Book of Mormon, this claim still has a few die-hard advocates who believe Eber Howe's assertion that there is an as yet undiscovered third Spalding manuscript that is the real source of the Book of Mormon. The arrival of Sidney Rigdon and Edward Partridge in Fayette became an opportunity to expand on a new doctrine that Joseph Smith had recently introduced. The Lord first revealed this doctrine in two revelations to the prophet Joseph in late September 1830. D&C 29, verses 7 through 8, quote, "And ye are called to bring to pass the gathering of mine elect. For mine elect hear my voice, and harden not their hearts. Wherefore the decree hath gone forth from the Father, that they shall be gathered in unto one place upon the face of this land, to prepare their hearts, and be prepared in all things against the day when tribulation and desolation are sent forth upon the wicked." Unquote. D&C 31, verses 7 through 8, quote, "Behold, verily I say unto you, Thomas B. Marsh, go from them, your family, only for a little time, and declare my word, and I will prepare a place for them. Yea, I will open the hearts of the people, and they will receive you. And I will establish a church by your hand, and you shall strengthen them and prepare them against the time when they shall be gathered." Unquote. These two revelations contain the first indications that members of the new church would be gathered to a single place. With hundreds of new converts in Ohio and rising persecution against the branches of the church in New York, in late December 1830, the Lord called the saints in New York to gather with the saints in Ohio. D&C 37, verses 1 and 3, quote, Behold, I say unto you, that it is not expedient in me that ye should translate any more until ye shall go to the Ohio, and this because of the enemy, and for your sakes. And again, a commandment I give unto the church, that it is expedient in me that they should assemble together at the Ohio, against the time that my servant Oliver Cowdery shall return unto them. Unquote. The commandment in verse 1 to cease translating refers to Joseph and Sidney's work on the new translation of the Bible. The phrase against the time in verse 3 means in preparation for the time. The Lord commanded the saints to assemble together at the Ohio in preparation for the time that Oliver Cowdery would return from the Lamanite mission in Missouri. The Third Conference of the Church was held on Sunday, 2nd January 1831, at Peter Whitmer's home in Fayette. The saints who attended the conference had heard of Joseph's revelation commanding the church to gather in Ohio. Knowing that this would require them to sell their lands and many of their possessions, they sought more information from the Lord concerning this matter. The revelation now canonized as Section 38 was given at the conference in response to their requests. D&C 38, verses 31 through 33, quote, "And that ye might escape the power of the enemy, and be gathered unto me a righteous people, without spot and blameless. Wherefore for this cause I gave unto you the commandment that ye should go to the Ohio. And there I will give unto you my law, and there you shall be endowed with power from on high. And from thence whosoever I will shall go forth among all nations, and it shall be told them what they shall do. For I have a great work laid up in store, for Israel shall be saved, and I will lead them whithersoever I will, and no power shall stay my hand." Unquote. The Lord commanded members of the church to gather in Ohio for 5 reasons. First, to escape their enemies, referring specifically to the rising persecution in New York. Second, to create a righteous people. Third, to receive the law of the Lord. The law of the Lord was revealed at Kirtland, Ohio on the 9th of February, 1831, and is now canonized as Section 42. We'll discuss this revelation in our next lesson. Fourth, to be endowed with power from on high. This would take place through the ordinances of the Kirtland Temple. Fifth, having been endowed, to go forth as missionaries to the nations of the world. Joseph's next revelation, received 3 days later on the 5th of January, 1831, repeated the promise of an endowment to be followed by taking the gospel to other nations. Quote, "And inasmuch as my people shall assemble themselves at the Ohio, I have kept in store a blessing such as is not known among the children of men, and it shall be poured forth upon their heads, and from thence men shall go forth into all nations." Unquote. The doctrine of Zion that we've mentioned in earlier lessons is closely connected to the doctrine of the gathering. Zion is a place of safety to which the saints may gather for protection and where they can be taught God's law. For Latter-day Saints, the gathering of Israel involves bringing together covenant people to designated places where they can enjoy the blessings of temples. In Nauvoo, Wilford Woodruff recorded that Joseph Smith taught, quote, "Joseph then asked what the object of gathering the Jews together, or the people of God, in any age of the world. The main object was to build unto the Lord an house, whereby he could reveal unto his people the ordinances of his house and glories of his kingdom, and teach the people the ways of salvation. For there are certain ordinances and principles that, when they are taught and practiced, must be done in a place or house built for that purpose. This was purposed in the mind of God before the world was, and it was for this purpose that God designed to gather together the Jews oft, but they would not. It is for the same purpose that God gathers together the people in the last days, to build unto the Lord an house, to prepare them for the ordinances and endowments, washings and anointings, etc." Unquote. The Kirtland area in northeastern Ohio was the first gathering place designated by the Lord in the latter days, but he declared that it would be a gathering place only for a little season. Jackson County, Missouri, would be revealed as Zion, the land appointed and consecrated for the gathering of the saints. In the 19th century, the gathering place for the saints moved from Ohio to Missouri to Nauvoo and finally to Utah. Church leaders encouraged converts from Europe and other places in the world to come to America and join the community of God's covenant people. Today, members in all parts of the world are encouraged to gather in their own communities and build Zion in their own wards and stakes. To facilitate this, stakes are established and temples are built in many countries. President Spencer W. Kimball taught in 1975, quote, "The gathering of Israel is effected when the people of the faraway countries accept the gospel and remain in their native lands. The gathering of Israel for Mexicans is in Mexico, in Scandinavia for those of the northern countries. The gathering place for the Germans is in Germany, and the Polynesians in the islands, for the Brazilians in Brazil, for the Argentines in Argentina. We express our appreciation to the Lord for his goodness as we direct the activities of 3.5 million people, ever growing more populous and more independent and even more faithful." Unquote. Another important passage from the Revelation in section 38 commanded the members of the church to be one, and if ye are not one, ye are not mine. It's important that we read this oft-quoted passage in context. It's sometimes incorrectly understood in the sense that Latter-day Saints must hold to the same beliefs or opinions about doctrinal or secular matters, but that's not what it's about. D&C 38, verses 24 through 27, quote, "And let every man esteem his brother as himself, and practice virtue and holiness before me. And again I say unto you, let every man esteem his brother as himself. For what man among you having 12 sons, and is no respecter of them, and they serve him obediently? And he saith unto the one, Be thou clothed in robes, and sit thou here. And to the other, Be thou clothed in rags, and sit thou there. And looketh upon his sons, and saith, I am just? Behold, this I have given unto you as a parable, and it is even as I am. I say unto you, Be one, and if ye are not one, ye are not mine." Unquote. Keep in mind that one of the major concerns the members of the church had at this time was that they would have to sell their lands and possessions in order to gather to Ohio. For further context, we have to go back to verses 16 through 20, which speak of divisions in the church between rich and poor, and the promise of a land of inheritance where everyone will benefit. From there, we go forward to verses 34 to 39, which told the saints in New York how to organize the move to Ohio while looking to the poor and the needy and administering to their relief. When the entire passage is read in context, it becomes clear that the unity the Lord is concerned about is economic equality. BYU professors Stephen E. Robinson and H. Dean Garrett explained, quote, "In order to prepare the saints for the celestial law of consecration about to be given them, the Lord commanded that they teach each other within the scope of their callings, that they learn to care about their fellow saints as much as they did themselves, and that they practice virtue and holiness. Note the repetition of the commandment to esteem their brother as themselves in verse 25, for this is the key. For example, if I truly love you as I love myself, then I cannot be happy if you are in want, and your well-being becomes a condition of my well-being. This is the attitude the saints had to develop if they were going to be able to live the Lord's celestial law when they got to Ohio and Missouri." Unquote. The revelation in section 38 was given to prepare the saints to receive the law of the Lord, which he promised to give them in Ohio. We'll discuss this law in our next lesson. The two revelations in sections 39 and 40 concern James Covell, a resident of Western New York who heard about the restored Church of Christ, came to Joseph Smith and covenanted that he would obey any command the Lord gave him through the prophet. Joseph Smith's 1839 manuscript history and the section heading in previous editions of the Doctrine and Covenants asserted that Covell had been a Baptist minister for 40 years. More recent research has shown that he was actually a Methodist minister. Through his prophet, Joseph, the Lord revealed to James Covell intimate details of his life. His heart was, at that time, right with God, but he had previously rejected Christ many times because of his pride. The revelation commanded Covell to be baptized, to serve as a missionary, and to help build up the restored Church of Christ. After receiving this revelation, Joseph explained, quote, James Covell rejected the word of the Lord and returned to his former principles and people, unquote. The next day, the Lord revealed to Joseph and Sidney Rigdon that Covell had been sincere when he came asking for a revelation, but that, quote, the fear of persecution and the cares of the world caused him to reject the word, unquote. These two revelations involve the doctrine of agency that we discussed last week. James Covell had covenanted to do what the Lord said, and Satan offered him a counterproposal. Covell decided which of the two offers he was going to follow, and he is accountable to God for his decision. Sections 39 and 40 were the final revelations received in New York before Joseph Smith moved west to Ohio. To conclude this lesson, let's fast forward 2 months and discuss the office of church historian. D&C 47, verses 1 through 3. Quote, Behold, it is expedient in me that my servant John should write and keep a regular history, and assist you, my servant Joseph, in transcribing all things which shall be given you, until he is called to further duties. Again, verily I say unto you, that he can also lift up his voice in meetings, whenever it shall be expedient. And again I say unto you, that it shall be appointed unto him to keep the church record and history continually. For Oliver Cowdery I have appointed to another office. Unquote. The individual referred to in verse 1 was John Whitmer, son of Peter Whitmer Sr., older brother of David Whitmer, and one of the 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon. The revelations in sections 15, 26, and 30 were also addressed to him. In the revelation now canonized as section 47, John was called to the office of church historian. John served faithfully in the historian's office until July 1834, and he continued to keep a history of the church for 4 more years after that. Why is recording and preserving our history so important to the church? It's important primarily because the Lord has repeatedly commanded the leaders of his church to keep a history of it. It's also important because Latter-day Saints believe that God intervenes in the history of mankind to bring to pass his purposes and goals. The Old Testament and the Book of Mormon are examples of 2 divine histories that show how God has been directly involved in the lives of his people. Thirdly, keeping an accurate and thorough history helps us to be sure that we are following the right path based on the revelations and the decisions made in council meetings. The prophet Joseph instructed the 12 apostles and other brethren at Kirtland, quote, If you assemble from time to time and proceed to discuss important questions and pass decisions upon the same, and fail to note them down, by and by you will be driven to straits from which you will not be able to extricate yourselves, because you may be in a situation not to bring your faith to bear with sufficient perfection or power to obtain the desired information, or perhaps for neglecting to write these things when God revealed them, not esteeming them of sufficient worth, the Spirit may withdraw, and God may be angry. And here is or was a vast knowledge of infinite importance, which is now lost. What was the cause of this? It came in consequence of slothfulness, or a neglect to appoint a man to occupy a few moments in writing all these decisions. Here let me prophesy. The time will come when, if you neglect to do these things, you will fall by the hands of unrighteous men. Now, if you will be careful to keep minutes of these things, as I have said, it will be one of the most important records ever seen. for every such decision will, ever after, remain as items of doctrine and covenants." Unquote. Truman G. Madsen, who was a professor of religion and philosophy at Brigham Young University, noted, quote, "If all of the 12 apostles in 1844 in Nauvoo had promptly recorded the meeting in which Joseph rolled off the responsibility from his shoulders upon them and charged them in what he called his last charge to go forward in building the kingdom, any claim that he intended someone else to succeed to the presidency of the church would be completely refuted by contemporary documents. But only one of the 12, Orson Hyde, recorded that meeting at the time. Most of those present didn't say much about it until several years later. Hence, although the charge that this meeting was a convenient afterthought is a false one, as a church we would have been invulnerable on this point if proper records had been kept. They would have refuted any possible claim that Joseph did not want the president of the 12 to succeed him." Unquote. Although the decisions made at the ward and stake level have less of an impact on the church as a whole, I believe that keeping accurate minutes in quorums and councils is just as important as it is among the leading councils of the church. In each meeting, an individual should be called or appointed to write down the decisions and commitments that are made so that they can be reviewed in future meetings. This will ensure that important items and important people do not slip through the cracks. Church history is not the same kind of history that is kept by secular historians. The histories of the church, as kept by the church historian and recorder's office, all the way down to ward historians, are naturally going to be biased towards seeing events as unfolding according to a divine purpose. And that's as it should be. As Latter-day Saints, we believe that we have a divine commission from God, and our official histories are going to reflect how people respond to that commission. Secular history, what some have called warts and all history, is important, but its role is not to build faith or to uplift. While I believe it's vital that we know that side of our history and be aware of the failings and mistakes of historical individuals, we must also temper that with a perspective of faith and the realization that God is at the helm, even if the people he chooses to carry out his directives have done so imperfectly. This holistic approach to Latter-day Saint history, one that is accurate and honest, and also recognizes the divine hand of God, best serves the spiritual and intellectual needs of members of the church and shows respect to our forebears who struggled to build the kingdom of God despite their imperfections. That concludes this lesson. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button and leave a comment below. Please subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new lessons are posted to this channel, and visit www.huarc.org to download these notes and this slideshow. In our next lesson, we'll discuss the office of bishop, the law of the Lord revealed in Kirtland, and the law of consecration. The reading is sections 41 and 42, 44, 48, 51, 70, 72, and 79. See you next week.